go ahead and. All right, Conversations with Keith, as always, here talking with somebody that hopefully you want to know something of what's going on. The General Assembly starts Monday, Tuesday. We're here with State Senator Wil Schroder. In his offices in Covington, you can see a beautiful view of Cincinnati and the river in the background. And we're going to talk about some of the things that's going to be coming up over the next 30-day session. You'll just read all sorts of stories about it. Once that Supreme Court decision was made, changed the whole tone of the session. When does it tell us how it gets started as far as the Senate's concerned and how all of that will work?
So Tuesday we'll come in at 2 o'clock, and typically that first week, we'll adopt the Senate rules, just some of the procedures. It's kind of standard stuff. We also have some trainings, just like anti-harassment trainings and those kind of things that, we do those every session. Also, I expect some bills to be filed. I'm a chair now of State and Local Government Committee. Expect to hear a couple bills that first week, but with only 4 days, I think people will be filing stuff, but wouldn't expect that we'd have time to pass anything.
Now, when you mentioned about filing bills, because we've been hearing for the last 3 or 4 months, the bills have been pre-filed. Mm-hmm. So if a bill has been pre-filed, like Mark Hart has pre-filed a couple, how are those handled at this point in time? Do you have to take them up then?
So pre-filing a bill, the only advantage of that really is just putting it out there. For instance, an example, Speaker Osborne, in response to the Kentucky Supreme Court's decision on nonprofit taxes, he went ahead and pre-filed a bill so people would realize, hey, we're going to work on this, we're going to address this issue. But you don't have to pre-file a bill, and there's nothing that says those bills get priority over a non-pre-filed bill.
Okay, so that's pretty much what the first 4 days is going to be. Now, you mentioned something that I hadn't thought of until you said it, that you're going to take up the Senate rules. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's the process of how things that will go down. And I very well may be wrong here. Do you have to change anything? Because that's what the Supreme Court had ruled was unconstitutional.
Right, so that won't get changed. How we interpret those rules will be changed.
Okay.
We've talked about how they were looked at one way for a number of years by both parties, accepted the rules, and then the Supreme Court said no. It had to do with the title amendments and the readings and everything like that. So that will impact how we go forward and how we look at those. But as far as those actually being a rule change, no, that won't happen. Sometimes the rule changes are just kind of minor stuff that you really wouldn't even think about. For example, there used to be a senator that would bring big exhibits onto the Senate floor, and then they had a rule change that said, unless you get permission from leadership, you can't have exhibits on the Senate floor. So things like that. Okay.
All right. Well, you mentioned one of the questions I wanted to delve into. You all passed a lot of things. You did a lot of things. You were active in last spring in that session.
Yeah.
There's at least a couple things that I know that you all want to kind of correct and kind of unintended consequences. You had mentioned about the charitable. I think there's some conversation about the retirement income from $31,000 back up to $41,000. Kind of comment on those two things, why you're looking at those, and is there anything else that was kind of you found out after the fact, oh, that's not what we meant, and you want to touch upon and correct?
Yeah, I think originally when you go back to the constitutional amendment in 2000 for the short session, because as you remember, we didn't always have a short session in Kentucky. So the purpose of the 30-day session was really to handle cleanup language in bills, make changes that from the budget year, the 60-day session needed to be made, and then more like an emergency legislation, they decided that instead of waiting every 2 years to have a session, that you'd have one every year, just have a short session. And I often tell people it was with good intentions, but now what's happened is that we basically have a 60-day session crammed into a 30-day session. That there's not a restraint on the number of bills that get filed. That's something that I've been looking into. Mm-hmm. Some states do restrict that. And I think there's a good argument you could be made for that. But those two subject matters that you brought up, I think they were both pre-filed bills, and I do expect them to get some consideration. The one with the charitable, of course we have our tax reform, so a lot of people thought that was something we did, but actually what had happened was there was a Kentucky Supreme Court decision that changed the way they looked at how nonprofits were taxed, and that impacted it. So it was, as a politician, especially during, I was in cycle, so
Yeah.
we were getting blamed for something that.
Wait a minute, politicians get blamed for things? Breaking news right there.
Yeah. So, but no, that was certainly, both of those are going to be taken up and debated.
Do you expect any issues with those two bills? Because it seems like both sides have been very pro on getting those things handled and taken care of.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not sure. The devil's always in the details, right? I think, especially when you look at the nonprofits, as far as the charity fundraisers and stuff, I think that's a pretty easy thing to agree on, that we don't want admissions to those being charged. It gets a little more complicated when you look at a situation where, like, the YMCA offers gym memberships. Well, if you say they're exempt from any taxation there, what about your private gym membership? And they're in direct competition. So I think that will kind of get a little more debate. But some of the stuff, as far as, okay, if you and your wife buy a charity event to whatever charity of your choice, should you have to pay tax to go to this charity dinner? You have to pay tax on silent auction items. Those are things that I wouldn't think would be too controversial. And at the end of the day, with that, we're not talking a lot of revenue that really goes to the general fund.
So even though while it's a lot of revenue for the charitable organization,
Exactly.
it's really just maybe not even a drop in the bucket
It's
to
really
the state
not.
government.
Right. It's not. So.
Any other issues between those two that you expect for what this session was supposed to be about, as far as cleaning up language? Is there anything else that you?
I think we're gonna have to continue to look at some of the revenue bill that passed and how it impacts some of the different companies, some of the bigger companies. When you're dealing with a big tax bill like that, and the unintended consequences of impacts so many different people in different ways. So it's an ongoing conversation that I think we'll have to come back to.
So when you say the bigger companies, is it they got more of a break than what you all anticipated?
No,
or?
I think it's just the structuring is different, and but not more of a break now.
Okay.
So.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about revenue since you kind of brought that up, and we'll segue right into that. One of the questions has been out there, and then I know there's been two bills that I think have been pre-filed that we'll talk about. But the Republicans have talked about wanting to reform the tax code. Maybe, I know Mark Hartmore in our conversations has talked about wanting to go away from an income base to a consumption base. I wouldn't anticipate any more movement towards that in this session,
Right.
but more next year in the next budget session.
I think so. I think that's fair. A lot of people are interested in going that way, and part of the reason has been our surrounding states with Tennessee and Indiana specifically. They have benefited from going that route, less income, more spread the base on sales tax and services. And that was step one of what we started to do. I've always been in favor of, okay, that was step one. Let's wait. Let's not be too aggressive. Let's wait to see actually how this impacts us. The majority of Kentucky's revenue comes from personal income tax and sales combined. Those are the two big ones. So when you start playing around with that, I think we need to be cautious. It's not something we want to just rush into and completely eliminate our personal income tax, because what's going to happen with, how much does that raise sales tax or spread sales tax unexpectedly? And it's just something we have to consider. The good thing that I like to remind people with the spreading of the tax and lowering of personal income tax, it attracts more people with the personal income tax. to locate in Kentucky. But then also you're collecting the sales tax off people that are traveling through. So the tourism industry in Kentucky has been doing really well thanks to bourbon. So those people that are coming in, buying things, we're benefiting from that. Where obviously with their income tax, we're not gonna collect anything from those people.
Yeah, and I guess with the ARC right here in Northern Kentucky, the Speedway,
Yeah.
Mammoth Cave, you can see some of those kind of things coming up. On one of the pre-filed bills has been about sports betting.
Yep.
And, I shared on our Outlook Facebook page an article that Kentucky Today put out about sports betting. But kind of what's your thoughts on where it stands? You'll see a lot of people are talking. I've even seen teachers, very proponents of casino, sports betting, and devote all that money to the pension crisis.
Yeah.
So kind of what's your thoughts on those kind of things?
Let's break it down into two, silos, I guess. One, sports betting, and then casinos. First, let's talk about sports betting. The projections are really low, and by really low, we're talking anywhere from 14 to, I've seen 30 being the highest at 30 million. So 14 million to 30 million. Pretty low when you're talking about the budget, problems that we face here.
How much is the entire budget? How much?
So without the federal funds coming in, you're looking at around 14 billion.
So you're talking about 15, 30 million out of 14 billion.
Right.
Okay.
So, and don't get me wrong, every penny adds up, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. But I think there's other reasons some people are proposing monitoring or the state getting involved in sports wagering, and that's because you can set up programs to deal with addiction problems. You can monitor it. You can have it, just regulated. And I know a lot of times we think of regulation being a bad thing, but then there's certain times you want regulations, like with alcohol. And a lot of people are making the case that when it comes to gambling, you want those regulations. A lot of people will argue, betting on the Bengals or the Reds or whoever, that's already going to happen anyway. So let's go ahead and regulate it here in the Commonwealth. Get a little bit, even though at the end of the day it's not going to be a lot. Let's go ahead and get a little bit of revenue out of it and go from there. I'm open to that conversation. At the end of the day, I'm not sure it's going to have a lot of push behind it. What I remind people all the time is we still have dry counties, right? You're familiar with this?
Yeah.
And
wet city, dry county.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when it comes to casino gaming, sports gaming, we all come from just different areas. We represent different areas, and so for a representative that represents maybe an area like we're in right now, it's just not that big of a deal. But as you get into rural Kentucky, it can become a more controversial issue. So I always like to separate, let's take the morality argument out of it. Let's just look at the money. And so the casino gaming now, just talking about that, again, I heard that, if you guys would have casino gaming, everything would be okay. Yeah. And that's simply not the case. So there's a Rockefeller Institute did a study, take out Nevada, because they're the outlier, obviously, with Vegas. You look at all the other states that have added casino gaming, and it's brought an additional 1 to 2% of their budget. Yeah. So again, every dollar adds up. But if it's going to bring in, $200 million, or it's not going to be a financial solution to all of Kentucky's problems. It's just not. Now, again, if you want to talk about, well, there's one right across the river. There's one right across the river in Indiana, down by Louisville.
One up the river that way. Yeah.
So why don't we can have that conversation. I think it's important to always point out that it's not going to be the saving grace for our problems here.
Now, how much? What you all put approximately $2 billion into the pension, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The other thing that has been brought up a lot is recreational marijuana and to tax it. We had talked about before in the interviews during the campaign that medical marijuana and recreational, that you saw it as kind of two different issues.
I did. Yeah.
And one of the things that Kentucky Today reported that was Colorado, I think it was in their 6th year, which was their best year. So it took them 6 years to get to that point, had $247 million in revenue, which is a lot of money. But at the same time, it would take 8 years at $247 million revenue to get the $2 billion that you just pumped into it.
Right.
So to think that that's going to be kind of like you said, to think that that's going to solve all the problems, it may help address them,
Right.
but it doesn't even come close to helping solve.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head, and that's again why I like to separate. Okay, we can have this moral, philosophical debate, and then we can have this monetary debate. And so many people just think this is going to be the solution. You know, this is a silver bullet, and it's not. And we've seen that from Colorado. And Colorado's really, I mean, that's the state I look at because they seem to be doing the best. So, you know, what is the potential? Another problem that Colorado has experienced is that you end up diverting so many of the funds into different groups. You know, you have anti-drug prevention campaigns, all these things that are good things. But then again, that money's not going directly into the general fund.
So where do you stand on that as far as the thought process of legalizing marijuana? Which there's a vocal, I don't know if it's a majority or minority, I'm not sure, but they're vocal about allowing adults to do it.
Right.
And then taxing it and having that money.
I mean, I think there's the libertarian argument to be made for individuals having that choice. I just don't think Kentucky, though, is ready to go down that path. Again, we still have dry counties, you know, and if you go down that path, how's it going to work? You can go back to casino gaming. A lot of people talk about casino gaming. I say, well, in theory, you know, it's an easy thing to debate, but when you start talking about the specifics of it, okay, Northern Kentucky, we'll say, I represent Newport over there, so we'll say Newport. Let's say they decide to put a casino in Newport. Now, is it fair that all the proceeds from that go down to Frankfort and get split up to 120 counties when, you know, Newport, Campbell County is the one willing to have the casino in their backyard? I would say that they should get a higher cut because they're going to also have to deal with the problems that come along with the casino. And then you're going to have people from dry counties that want to make sure that would never be willing. I keep using dry counties because I put in my mind them with not really being willing to have a casino in their backyard, right? Yeah. And casinos aren't going to be able to locate there. They're going to go obviously where somewhere they can serve alcohol. But they're going to say, well, hold on, if I'm going to vote for casino gaming, I need to be getting something back to, you know, go back to the district with. They expect some of the proceeds from the casino gaming to benefit their district as well. So when you get in those specific conversations, the last time that, you know, Governor Beshear, that was his big push, and it was one of the debates was, well, should it go to where the horse tracks are? And a lot of people said, you know, our horse industry is struggling, we need to put it where the horse tracks. And then there's a lot of other people, myself included, that thought, well, hold on a second, you know, we're giving the horse industry pretty much a monopoly on gaming. Why are we doing that? And is that unfair to everyone else that might want to, you know, consider going down that track?
So where do you see the revenue coming from? And maybe it won't be something that you would address in this session, but this term takes you through another budget.
Right.
So in the January of 2020, you'll be looking at a budget, looking at revenue. Where is, if it's not recreational marijuana, if it's not raising income taxes, if it's not sports betting and casinos, where is the revenue supposed to come from?
So my philosophy, and pretty much the philosophy I ran on this last election, is that we need to make Kentucky a business-friendly environment, business-friendly climate, so businesses aren't leaving the state, more businesses are relocating in the state, and that's been working the last few years. I think we've seen the number of jobs, over 17,000 new jobs have come. We had set the record for $9.1 billion of investment. The latest number, I think, is closer to 15 in the Bevan, since Bevan's been in office. And I realize some of that investment is with already existing companies like Toyota. but a lot of it's new companies coming into the Commonwealth as well. So the more people, the more companies we have in, the more people we have working. I just saw today, I actually posted on my page, 120 counties.
Saw that, yeah.
Yeah, unemployment rate's under 10%, first time since 2000. So the more people we have in the workforce, more people are paying that personal income tax, more people have more money to spend, helps our sales tax. So by creating a business-friendly environment, by having more workforce participation rates increase, we're gonna have more money coming into the general fund. And that's just been, that's been a Republican philosophy, and that's a philosophy I personally believe in and ran on.
And I actually wrote that story, I guess it was on Wednesday, with Pendleton County specifically in the North Kentucky region. Our unemployment rate was, I think, 3.2% in those figures for November, which was down from 3.8 in October of 18 and 3.8 of November of 17.
Okay.
So it had even dropped 0.6% on that. So yeah, which is good numbers.
Right.
There's a lot of thoughts out there that maybe in May, maybe in the summer, there might be a slight recession coming. But teaching economics and business for all those years, that's what happens. There's a business economic cycle.
Yeah.
And you go back to the 1800s, and every 20 to 40 years, it happens. It happens. Well, let's go on. Let's go ahead and delve into the big one.
Okay.
Pensions. You all kind of thought you'd taken care of it. You had addressed it.
Right.
The Supreme Court by a 7-0 vote. So it wasn't a political partisan decision. It was pretty much the judicial in agreement, saying not that anything in the bill was unconstitutional.
Right.
So you still have a possible lawsuit looming on anything in the bill.
Yep.
But that the process that you all, and we talked about it real briefly at the beginning, but the process that you passed it was unconstitutional. So as you look ready for Tuesday, I think there was a bill already pre-filed in this special session. So is that the bill that you all will start addressing, or do you expect a new bill to just come up?
It's hard to say, and I say that because the House elected a lot of new members. And so I think part of, to answer your question, is a pension bill going to happen or not, what will it look like more importantly, is going to depend on what do the members have a stomach for. In the Senate, we picked up one member. He had previously been in the House. He had voted on Senate Bill 151. We know what we're getting there. Actually, we have another, so we have 28 members now, but we also, Joe Bowen retired, so Matt Caslin took his place. Matt had voted for Senate Bill 151 when he was in the House last year. So we know, with the Senate, we know where we are pretty much. I think when you start tweaking the bill, then that, every member's gonna have different questions and different concerns. But with the House and with their new members, they're gonna have to figure out, what are they willing to do.
As you look back, it's funny because, one of the thoughts is we've got to get everybody to the table and get input. Well, there's been 10 months, 9 months of a lot of input on the bill. As you look back at the bill and what was in Senate Bill 151, are there things that you go, okay, we do need to tweak this, we do need to look at this, or are you comfortable with, because I know Mark, when I talked to him last night, he's comfortable voting on the same bill.
Senate Bill 151, a lot of it, I think, was presentation. We've talked about that, and, the way it happened at the end. People felt cheated, or that they didn't have time, and that something, sneaky was going on when we ran into time constraints. So, but, the sick day is being capped, and teachers would still get a lump sum payment for the sick days. I ran into a superintendent who didn't realize that. He said, I'm going to start having to hire more substitute teachers. And I said, they'll still get a lump sum payment. You can still collect your sick days. You get a lump sum payment. What doesn't happen, it doesn't factor into your top 3 years.
Yeah. The lump sum payment is actually dependent upon the local district. You're all given that option, but the local district. So you might have a local district who would choose to take that away.
You could have that, yeah. So that was actually an idea that was presented to us from the superintendent's group. I think we should have done a better job explaining, look, this was pretty much a concession made by superintendent's group. Going into a 401k cash hybrid plan, that was the big, that's the majority of the bill right there. And that's what people were frustrated about or upset about. In 2013, that's what the rest of the pension plans went into. I think it's fair. State of Pennsylvania just recently did a similar model. So I think, if that comes up again, I'm okay with considering it again.
Mm-hmm.
I never try to say definite, because you can change your views or things get added to the bill that were unexpected, right? So I think to some extent, I remember saying this at a Pendleton County forum before last session. People will say, how will you vote on this bill? And I always say, look, I think it's legislative malpractice, if there is such a thing, to come out and say I'm a yes or I'm a no without even seeing the bill, without even reading it. But if it's consistent of the pension bill that we did last time, I'm definitely leaning in favor of being a yes vote again. But I want to, again, listen to everyone. I always try to do that. And then there's something else that you brought up that another big important part of the bill was the requirement that the General Assembly pay. It was more like a mortgage style payment, and I think that was important. And part of the special session problem, that part wasn't in there at first, and a lot of legislators, myself included, had a big problem, because we were like, well, part of what made this pension bill so good was that it required future General Assemblies to make the payments based on the actuarial analysis said was due, was the obligation for that year. So if, you had mentioned putting $2 billion into the pension system. Well, if it comes back and it says, we need our annual required contribution this year is 1.5, and legislators say, well, we only want to put $500,000 in. Well, no, that doesn't work, because there's this bill that required the funding. So,
okay. And so when you got to that special session on that Monday night that bill was filed, that had been taken out of the bill?
So that had been separated. They actually ended up filing a House Bill 2. There's House Bill 1 and House Bill 2. And there was some debate on, this came up during the lawsuit. One of Andy Beshear's arguments, our Attorney General, was saying that was an appropriations, having that. And so if it was an appropriations, it was going to need more votes. So the idea was, let's separate that in a separate bill, because they thought that Democrats would come on board to vote for that, because that's a good thing. You want the General Assembly funding it to the required amount.
Because that's what created the problem.
Yeah,
They hadn't in the past.
That was a huge
General
part.
Assemblies hadn't done that.
That was a huge part of the problem, yeah.
All right. A lot of teacher groups, a lot of superintendents are concerned about the cash hybrid removes the defined benefits, and it will be harder in future generations to attract teachers. What's your thoughts on their concerns that it's just going to hurt future generations of teachers?
Yeah, so it is getting, without a doubt, it's getting harder to attract teachers. It's also getting harder to attract police and fire, many of our public services. It's just getting harder, and when you're competing with booming economies that we've been seeing lately, and the private sector's been doing so well, it makes it all that much harder. What we've seen and what I continue to hear from, and not only people going into the market, but hearing back from employers, the number one thing that most people look at when they're considering a job is salary. Mm-hmm. Now, we would love, and I know teachers would love, and law enforcement too, everyone across the board, all state workers, would love if we could bump that salary up. And we would love to do that. We have to have the money to do it. So part of getting the pension liabilities under control is, well, if we do have that extra money, we can start raising salaries like we need to. And that will hopefully help with attracting more people. There's other benefits to the plan that aren't currently in place with the current system. One being millennials are jumping jobs a lot more frequently. So if they go into the teaching profession for 5 years, they have that in a cash hybrid 401k style plan, and say, you know what, this isn't for me, I'm not passionate about it. Then they can, take that money, that account can follow them with them.
Yeah.
Whereas now, if it's in the state account, you have to wait, there's all sorts of rules, or the age of retirement, if not. So there's a number of factors, but I think that is attractive to a lot of people too.
Okay. You had mentioned, let's see, now I forgot my question. Though you said something there, and I thought, oh, that's a good point. Golly, I can't remember it now. Senior moment is what I said.
It, I'm sure.
Yeah. Beyond pensions with education, there was an article that came out, I think it was last week, that the State Board of Education was going to make a couple requests
Okay.
of state lawmakers to consider. One was funding for charter schools.
Okay.
So what's the thought process on there?
I just didn't have, well, first I would say it's not a budget year, so that's not something I expect us to really debate this session, because it's not a budget year. But, in the last budget cycle, there's just too much controversy, I guess, surrounding that.
And before we go on, let's clear up one thing, because I think during the campaign, there were comments made that you were supportive of charter schools.
Right.
How did you vote on that charter school bill?
Correct. On the initial charter school vote, I was a no vote. I was one of 4 Republicans in the Kentucky State Senate that didn't vote for that bill. And you're right, and that was, put out there that I was a big proponent of charter schools. Some of the rhetoric, one thing that I think we saw in this campaign was just, we're gonna paint you, instead of looking at your individual record, you're a Republican, so we're gonna paint you as a Republican, and anything that certain Republicans have been for, therefore, we're gonna say you're for.
Yeah. One of my
that happens. That happens. You just got to deal with it. But I had concerns, and actually, that charter school bill that was passed, even my few constituents that I had that wanted charter schools, a lot of them had problems with that bill too. So it was like, the people that didn't want charter schools didn't like it, and some of the few people that didn't want charter schools didn't like it either. And then the funding, though, it was decided not to fund charter schools. So I understand that's what they want. I think we're gonna have to look next budget cycle. It's gonna continue to get hard. We're gonna have to continue to invest in the pension obligation. That's gonna drain a lot of resources. Also, I think the big concern is people just don't want the money that's going to the schools currently. They don't want that to be cut anymore. So if charter schools can be funded with some kind of revenue source, and you're not taking money away from public education, I've heard a lot of people say they're okay with that. But what their concern is are you going to be taking more money away from public education to fund these charter schools? And I think that's something we have to consider.
No, you actually said pension obligations. That's what I wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
I remember it now. All right, so you spent, because you mentioned about raises across the board for state workers. You spent $2 billion. That was above what your General Assembly needed to pay toward interventions to make up for what has not been paid in the past. How much more, how long, till you get caught back up and the General Assembly on every 2 years is just paying a yearly payment of what they're supposed to instead of trying to make up?
Yeah, and a lot of that will be conditioned on workforce, be conditioned on market conditions. I mean, we have had one of the best markets in a long time recently. I know last, week or month it's been more volatile than usual, and we've had some scares. But in general, we'd seen a pretty good market since President Trump had been in office. And people, especially supporting the KTRS plan, like, look, everything's okay. We've increased 2%, and my response was, with all that additional funding and some of the best market conditions we've seen in my lifetime, and we've only increased 2%, not everything's okay. We just have to consider that. But the plan, when we passed 151, it was going to put us on a 30-year trajectory, like a 30-year mortgage. That's why we use that mortgage example. So it will break it down, and you'll know, okay, we have to pay this much towards the liability each budget session, and start taking it in chunks. And because of course we can't do it overnight. And at the NKU debate, my opponent made a comment that we didn't put enough in to pensions because the liability was still there. And obviously, with a $14 billion budget, and KTRS alone has a $15 billion liability, we just can't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, even if we cut all services across the board, didn't shut down, we're seeing the federal shutdown. If we had a state shutdown for a whole year, it still doesn't it doesn't end the liability. And that's
For
just
one plan.
That's just KTRS,
Yeah.
correct. That's just one plan.
And how many plans are there?
So there's the KERS, Kentucky Employee Retirement Systems, and then within that, there's the hazardous, there's non-hazardous, and and then there's also the County Employee Retirement, the CERS, which the cities and counties are members of too.
So if you're $2 million or $2 billion, that's a seventh of the budget. Obviously, as you're making those payments, that's the money you could be spending on roads, salaries, those kind of things.
Correct.
And then as soon as you can get rid of that big payment,
Right.
that frees up a lot of money. Okay, I mean, a seventh of the budget almost all of a sudden becomes freed up.
Right, so I think the number in 2008 was that it was roughly 8% of the budget was going to pensions, and this last budget cycle is closer to 14-15% is going, so it to your point, yeah, absolutely, that's money that can't go towards education right now, can't go towards raises, becomes really difficult.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, going back to salaries, we're competing, we're competing against sort of surrounding states, not just with teaching, but again with law enforcement. We had a problem with our medical examiners for Kentucky State, looking at doing all the tests. They were just losing them to other states because Kentucky was paying so poorly. So it's something that we constantly hear, that salaries need to be raised. Kentucky State Police have been, really bad. We were able to give them a little, but not really, still not enough. It's never enough, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I think the prison personnel got a nice little raise in the budget that was needed.
It was, and that was a situation where you had a lot of officials, I guess staff or guards that were on food stamps.
Really?
And they're working second jobs. You had guards delivering pizza at night when they got off their shift and stuff like that. And
that's not good to have a prison
it's not good.
person
It's
who's
not
financially in trouble.
We have another one to keep on this subject. Individual, when I was at the Pinellas County Fair, came up to me and asked me about a situation, and I looked into it, and he was correct that we have a VA home that they couldn't get more beds in there because they couldn't staff it. They just couldn't find the people to work. So there was the space to hold more and house more people. They just couldn't find the workers to work it. So those are things that we really have to continue to, be aggressive in addressing.
You mentioned about a constituent coming up to you. If somebody wanted to reach out to you to talk about one of these subjects that we've already talked about, something in their life, or maybe something we're going to talk about in the future, how is the best way for them to do that?
My LRC email is the best, so it's Wil, just make sure you spell Wil with one L, WIL, .Schroder, SCHRODER, at lrc.ky.gov.
Okay.
And that, I'll see that, my assistant sees that, so, we have two sets of eyes, making sure I don't miss anything on that.
Okay.
And then, of course, if you see me in public, please stop me if you have a question. Besides when I'm at church. That's my only pet peeve,
We joked during the campaign, every time I saw a picture, you were eating someplace.
Yeah.
Have you calmed down on the eating now that the campaign's over?
Well, it's a new year, so I'm weighing in more than I ever have before. So let's just put it that way. I'm gonna have to scale down a little bit.
The fried foods of all the festivals and the pies. You were bidding on pies like crazy at the youth fair.
I got a sweet tooth, so.
Well, it was blackberry cake. Wasn't it blackberry jam cake that you bought, which is my favorite, so that's why I remember that.
Yeah.
One of the other things I had talked about that the State Board of Education was going to ask about was site base.
Okay.
They talked about increasing the parent representatives on site base, as well as allowing the superintendent to choose principals rather than site-based, and site-based just making a suggestion. Thoughts upon those kind of things that are coming out of the Department of Education? Because of course, that has wholly been revamped by Governor Bevins as far as the head of the Department of Education and who sits on the Board of Education. So some different things coming out.
Yeah, that's something I know we're gonna have to look into, and I'm gonna have to hear. I know there's been some interim meetings and talk to my colleagues. My good friend Max Wise is chair of the Education Committee. This is something that Senator from Boone, John Schickel, has also been looking at with site-based. He's been looking at this for a while. But I think the frustrations that we hear sometimes are the superintendents feel like they don't have enough say in running things, who's being hired, and that's important. Obviously, if you're going to have to work with people, you want to make sure they're a good fit for your personality and for the school's personality and everyone around. So I think that the big complaint has sometimes been that their hands are tied and they'd like to have more say, which I think seems like a reasonable request that we should definitely consider.
We had talked about, I think in the campaign, is either you have the most school districts in your district or one of the top. So have you talked to some of the superintendents about how they feel on some of these, where do they stand on some of these school issues?
We have a pretty good, a lot of them email me and reach out to me, some of them text me from time to time. So I think as things get heated up here, I expect to hear more from them.
Okay. Any other subjects that you expect to come up? We've talked about pensions, revenue, those kind of things. Anything else that you see looming out there that's going to need to be addressed in this short session?
I'm sure, I know there are, but I think the conversation of CERS separating from the KERS board, that's been a topic that, we're looking at. Trying to think if, an issue that we've dealt with in the past, changing the election cycle. Mm-hmm. Kentucky's one of the few states that has this off-year election with statewide office holders. We'll have this year, 2019. Yeah. We have the governor's race on down, the auditor, treasurer. And Kentucky's unique in that. And a lot of people like it. It's the politics in me, somebody that likes politics, likes following politics. Yeah. I like it, but when you step back and say, does this really make sense financially for the state? It's expensive for all the counties to have to do this, hire poll workers, even though they don't get paid enough. But put on election in 120 counties, and then on top of that, we are always looking at ways, how can we improve turnout? Mm-hmm. Well, the best way to improve turnout would be to take this off-year election cycle for statewide office holders and put it on a presidential year. So Senator Chris McDaniel has had a constitutional amendment, I believe, if not every year I've been down there, 3 of the 4 maybe. That's something I supported in the past, and I expect that's gonna come up again.
How does of course the constitutional amendment for the United States, it's got to go in front of the states. Yeah. How does the constitutional amendment change in Kentucky? Great
question. So we would have to vote on it in the General Assembly. And then it's not like a bill, so the governor doesn't sign, he doesn't veto it, sign it or anything, but the General Assembly would have to pass it with language, and then that language would go to the voters, and then the voters would decide, okay, do we want this constitutional amendment or not? Mm-hmm. In this case, what it would do, it wouldn't impact this 2019, these 4 years, but the next time around, what would happen was there would be a year, additional year added. So you'd have a rare situation where the state office holders had a 5-year term instead of a 4-year term. It's not completely unique, because at one time, to get the judge execs and everyone on the same page in election cycles, they did something similar. So again, it wouldn't necessarily be a Governor Bevin term, because this would be the next time around. Mm-hmm. So,
but whoever is elected in 2019, if you all pass it, it becomes a constitutional amendment for the voters to vote on in this November election, and they pass it, whoever wins that governor election would get 5 years, and then in 2024 would be the next governor election.
No, so actually it would, in 2024 is when it would start the 5-year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So whoever wins this one gets 4.
Mhm.
In the 5-year term to get it into the,
Right.
so in
Or, I'm sorry, it wouldn't
it'd
be.
be 2023.
2023.
2023,
Correct.
and then it would become that governor. So
Right.
whoever wins this election is not getting the 5-year term.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Because I know I've seen them out there, the Bevan's trying to get another year. In actuality,
That's not the case.
because they're only allowed to run for 2 terms, right? So he would, if he wins, he would be done at 8 years no matter what.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Do you expect any Republican challenge for Governor Bevins? Do you want to announce it here, you're running for governor?
Well, we'll see. I think, I'm just being candid here. I think a lot of people have wondered why the governor hasn't filed yet. There's talk about if he's gonna stick with the same lieutenant governor running mate or not. And I think a lot of Republicans have just kind of been a little antsy on why he hasn't filed. We're in January now. It's the end of the month. There's not a lot of time left.
The filing date, January 31st?
It's not the 31st. I think it's the 20. I have to check.
But it's in January?
It is.
Okay.
It's the last Tuesday. So, I mean, we're getting, we're winding down. There's less than, either way, there's less than 31 days, right? So I think a lot of Republicans, that's just making them a little uneasy. There was a story today in one of the newspapers about Jamie Comer, his primary opponent last time. Now he's congressional member of Congress. He said, he's on the sidelines waiting. He's ready. So I don't know. I don't think the last minute, if he runs or not, I don't think that's really healthy for the party. I mean, we're facing a pretty crowded Democratic field. They're already out there. They're already raising the money. And granted, they have a big primary that they're going to have to hurtle through.
And 3 candidates with the qualifications.
So,
I mean, they've been there, they've done some things. It's not like they're coming out from being a community organizer to wanting to be governor. They've been involved.
They all meet the age qualifications and their residency qualifications.
Yeah.
But sure, the voters are going to have to make that case. But I just think Republicans would like to see. He says he's running again. So right now, he says he's running again. But with the filing day so soon, hopefully we can get on paper who he's running with and take it from there.
Okay.
At this point.
Anything else you want the resident or the constituents of your district to know going into the short session? Mark had shared with us that you all will be in next week, and then you take about 2 weeks off. You come back, I think it was February 5th.
We are. So we take about 3 weeks off, and one thing I try to do is I visit schools during that time. I have to come back here and work, but I leave and do school visits. And we sent out, I know my office has sent out emails to all the different school districts, but if there's any teachers watching that, especially I usually target classes that are usually 4th grade, 5th grade is who's coming down to Frankfurt. So a lot of times I'll go speak to 4th and 5th graders about just what we're doing down there. That's one of the good benefits of the short session is it allows us to get in the district a little bit in January and visit people, and also time to digest the bills longer, which is great. More public input and feedback. So yeah, that's that. And as far as what else I'd like to say is, of course, I'd like to say thank you to the residents of Pendleton County for re-electing me. It was really overwhelming in Pendleton County and greatly appreciate it. I told my wife we were gonna have to move to Pendleton County, so it was an exciting night, and Pendleton County really came up big for us, and we certainly appreciated it.
Now your email address is going to be swamped with all pictures of the homes for sale. People are going to hear, oh, I've got a home, I've got land, you can build.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking a few minutes and sitting down with us and talking to us, letting the people know about what's going on, and hearing it straight from the proverbial horse's mouth of what's happening and what you're looking to do over the next thing. Rather than me giving my opinion, they hear it from you. So thank you very much.
Happy New
Great
Year.
view. And I got to go to Cyclones game and work. So